Story 1. The Infinite Loop. I don't drive anymore. People hear that and assume DUI, panic attack, maybe some ugly wreck on black ice. I usually let them think that. It's easier than explaining how I spent maybe 20 minutes, maybe 2 hours, driving in circles under my office building while something I never actually saw kept making arrangements for the moment my engine finally died. My name's Nolan Price. I was 31 then, an accounts payable analyst at a software company on West Mercer, the kind of job where you stay late at the end of the quarter because nobody upstairs notices numbers until the numbers stop lining up. It was early December, cold enough that the air bit the inside of my nose when the lobby doors opened. I remember that because I was tired, hungry, and stupidly relieved to be done. I worked in Tower 3, parked on level 4 of the attached garage every weekday, same section, same pillar with the peeling yellow stripe. It was routine. Bright office upstairs, badge access, security cameras, fluorescent lights everywhere. Safe, or at least the kind of safe you stop thinking about. The first thing that felt off happened the second the elevator doors opened on level 4. There was this metallic tapping above me, slow and rhythmic, like somebody flicking a wrench against sheet metal. Tap, tap, tap. It was landing right over my parking row. I actually stood there for a second and looked up, because my first thought was a loose duct hanger or a bad ventilation fan blade knocking around in the housing. Buildings make noise. Garages especially. Concrete shifts, pipes tick, fans vibrate. I knew that much from staying late for enough maintenance calls. Still, there was something too deliberate about the spacing. Not random. Not mechanical exactly, like it was keeping time with my steps. I told myself that was me being overtired. End of story. I hit my remote, saw my headlights blink near the back wall, and started walking. My shoes made that dry, scraping sound against the dusty concrete, and for a few seconds it felt normal again. Just the usual smells, old oil sunk into the floor, stale exhaust trapped in the cold, damp concrete after a week of rain. The tapping stopped when I got to the car. I actually felt embarrassed by how relieved that made me. I tossed my laptop bag into the passenger seat, got in, locked the doors, and sat there a second with the heater blowing weakly at my hands. I remember noticing that the windshield had fogged around the edges even though the inside of the car wasn't that warm. Like the air outside was colder than it should have been down there. The drive down should have taken maybe a minute and a half. Level 4 to the exit was just a spiral ramp, left curve, then the gate on the ground floor. I eased out, followed the painted arrows, past the concrete columns, and started down. About 5 minutes later, I looked up from the wheel and saw my own parking row coming toward me again. Same yellow stripe on the pillar. Same dark sedan 2 spaces over. Same oil stain shaped like a boot print near the drain. Level 4. At first I thought I must have turned wrong. It sounds ridiculous now, but when you're tired and the levels all look the same, your brain reaches for the dumb explanation first. I checked the hanging signs. Level 4. I laughed once, just under my breath, because it felt better than admitting my stomach had tightened. I did the loop again, a little faster this time, paying attention. Down ramp, left curve, another ramp, concrete walls sliding past the windows in that gray-white flicker under bad fluorescent lights. Then I came around a bend and there it was again. My car's old spot, level 4. That's when I noticed the other cars were gone. Not all at once. It was more that I knew there had been cars there a second ago and now there weren't. The sedan by the yellow pillar, gone. The hatchback near the fire hose cabinet, gone. Empty spaces. Dust. A shopping bag flattened against the floor by some draft I couldn't feel. My hands were gripping the wheel hard enough that the tendons in my wrist hurt. I put the car in park and just listened. No engines. No voices. No elevator hum. Just, somewhere far off, a dragging metal sound, slow and heavy, like chain being pulled over concrete. I got out because standing still inside the car suddenly felt worse than moving. The air was colder than before, and there was this wet mineral smell under the exhaust, like a basement wall after a flood. I took maybe 6 steps and saw footprints in the dust. Mine. Same tread on the right heel where the rubber had worn smooth. They led away from my parking space, curved around the nearest row, and came back to it. A full circle. I followed them with my eyes twice before I understood what I was looking at. I hadn't walked that route. I would have remembered. I should have gotten back in and hit the gate full speed right then. Instead, I did what I always did when something didn't make sense. I treated it like a system problem. I called building security. No signal. Not low bars. Nothing. I tried the garage assistant's phone by the elevator. Dead. When I pressed the call button for the elevator, the doors slid open right away, and there was no elevator cab behind them. Just a raw concrete wall where the interior should have been, smooth and damp, lit by the elevator's ceiling light as if that made it normal. I backed away so fast my shoulder hit a pillar. That was when I heard my own voice call out from the stairwell across the lane. Nolan. Not a similar voice. Mine. Same flat way I say my own name on work calls. Same little catch on the second syllable when I'm out of breath. Help me. I don't know how long I stood there. Couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt stretched thin. The stairwell door was maybe 20 feet away, painted green, crash bar across the middle. I moved toward it because I couldn't not. My chest had gone tight like I'd run up too many stairs too fast, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. The closer I got, the more obvious it became the voice was coming from behind the door, low and strained. Open it. I shoved the bar. Nothing. I hit it harder. Still nothing. Then I saw the hasp bolted onto the outside frame, a heavy steel latch designed to take a padlock. There wasn't a lock hanging there, but the latch was dropped into place. The door had been secured from the garage side. From my side, I looked back at the car and saw movement near the pillars. Not movement exactly, a shape where no shape should have been. Every time I passed one of those square concrete columns on the drive down, I'd caught these little slips of shadow at the edge of the windshield. I had told myself it was the lighting, that fluorescent stutter you get in parking decks. Standing there, I watched a shadow separate itself from the far side of a pillar and stretch across the floor. It wasn't attached to anyone I could see. It just lengthened, climbed the column beside it, and then folded out of sight again as if something tall had stepped back. I got in the car, locked the doors, and started driving without really choosing to. The chain sound came again, closer this time, then the tapping on the roof, tap, tap, tap in the exact rhythm as before. I took the spiral faster. The signs started changing. I know how that sounds, but I mean literally changing. Level 3 became level 2, then level 5, then a blank white panel swinging slightly on one chain like it had just been hung there. The arrows on the floor kept pointing left, but the ramps didn't connect where they should have. One opened onto a dead concrete wall. Another curved too long, impossibly long. The same smear of black tire rubber repeating every few seconds like I was passing a copied section of road. Then I understood what had been bothering me beyond the fear of it. The geometry was wrong. I work with numbers all day. Patterns jump out at me whether I want them to or not. The columns were no longer spaced evenly. The ceiling got lower and then higher without the slope changing. A support beam I'd passed on my right showed up on my left. The garage wasn't just confusing me. It was rearranging itself around a fixed point, like pieces sliding on a board, keeping me moving, but never letting me reduce the distance to anything that mattered. The gas light blinked on. My mouth went dry so fast it felt like I'd swallowed dust. I hadn't had much in the tank. Enough to get home, not enough to idle in a concrete maze while something patient waited for physics to do its part. The tapping stopped. In the sudden quiet I could hear my own breathing, shallow and ugly, and that dragging chain somewhere above me, or below me, impossible to place. I tried the horn. Came out muffled, wrong, like the sound got swallowed a few feet from the car. I called 911 even though the phone still showed no service. It rang once, then I heard my own voice answer and say, calm as a voicemail prompt, "Please remain where you are." That broke whatever was left of my control. I stopped respecting the lanes, stopped following arrows. I cut across empty spaces, clipped a pillar hard enough to shear off my side mirror, and aimed for what I thought had to be the outer wall. The car bounced over a curb, slammed down, and the whole frame screamed. Ahead of me the fluorescent lights flickered in a line, one after another, and for a split second I saw something between them. Not a person, The outline of one, maybe, tall, narrow still, right where the proper exit should have been. Then the light over it died. I floored it. There was a plastic barrier arm dead ahead, striped red and white, attached to a ticket machine I had no memory of approaching. Beyond it I could see darkness that wasn't garage darkness. Real outside dark, open and uneven, with moving reflections from street traffic. The barrier came at the windshield. I didn't brake. The arm snapped over the hood with a crack like a gunshot. The front end dropped hard off the lip of the exit ramp, bottomed out, and I hit wet pavement on the city street with enough force to bite through my tongue. A taxi leaned on its horn. Somebody yelled. Cold night air came through the broken side window, carrying rain and fryer grease and actual life. I don't remember getting out. I remember kneeling at the curb with both hands flat on the sidewalk because they wouldn't stop shaking, and I remember looking back up at the garage entrance. It was just a normal exit lane under Tower 3. Ticket dispenser. Security camera. Concrete stained black from runoff. No broken geometry. No blank signs. No empty level with only my car in it. The barrier arm was intact, hanging across the lane. The police wrote it up as fatigue and reckless driving. Security reviewed the cameras and told me I entered on level 4 and exited less than 3 minutes later. My boss was decent about it, let me take a leave, then remote work. I tried once, a month later, to ride with a coworker into the same garage for a meeting upstairs. We made it halfway down the entrance ramp before my hands went numb and I had to get out on the sidewalk and throw up into a planter. After that, I stopped trying. I sold the car, moved closer to the office, and built my life around walking routes with open sky over them. What I can't get past isn't the loop. It isn't hearing my own voice behind that locked stairwell door. It's that whoever, whatever, had arranged that place wasn't chasing me. It didn't need to. It had already figured out how much gas I had, how long I'd keep choosing the logical route, how many times I'd trust the painted arrows before I stopped being useful to it. I still think about the footprints sometimes, the circle they made in the dust before I ever stepped out of the car. Like there was a version of the night where I had already gotten lost, already gotten out, already gone looking for a door that wouldn't open. I take the long way around city blocks now if I have to pass a garage entrance, and every now and then I catch myself listening for a chain dragging somewhere under the traffic, wondering what would have walked over when the car finally stopped. I quit that job not long after, at least the office part of it. I still do the same work from home, same spreadsheets, same invoices, same neat little columns that add up or don't. It should have made me feel normal again. Didn't. The problem with getting trapped somewhere built on repetition is that repetition stops feeling harmless after that. Elevators, ramps, office lobbies, even supermarket aisles if they're too empty. My body notices patterns before I do. Tenses up like it's trying to warn me ahead of time. And the thing that bothers me most is how prepared it all felt. Not random. Not some bad night in a place with broken lights. Prepared. Designed. Like I drove into the last stage of something that had already been set up long before I parked there. The next story starts with a note on a windshield. If you've ever found something on your car and laughed it off because who would go to that much effort for you, listen a little closer than I did. Story 2. The lowest level. The worst part wasn't the man behind the pillar. It wasn't even the way he kept getting closer without seeming to move. The worst part was opening my trunk because he told me to, already halfway sure there would be nothing there, and seeing somebody curled inside my car in my own hoodie, with my own face staring up at me like I was the one who didn't belong. My name is Keely Voss. I was 22 when this happened in my last year at Northbriar, still doing night studio twice a week because architecture professors like to act like sleep is a character flaw. I lived on campus then, not far enough away to justify anything except a beat-up hatchback and bad coffee, but the only garage permit I could afford was for the remote campus structure near the old athletic storage building. It was a long concrete thing set back from the prettier parts of campus, all orange sodium lights and tagged-up pillars and puddles that never dried right. This was late October, after midterms, cold and damp, and smelling like wet leaves even inside the garage. I hated parking there alone, but I hated missing class more. That night I got out around 11. My shoulders ached from leaning over models all evening, and I had glue on 2 fingers that wouldn't peel off. I remember thinking I just wanted to get back to the dorm, microwave noodles, and not hear another person critique my work until morning. Level 6 was mostly empty. My car was down in the deepest corner of the level, where the lights thinned out and one of the exit signs pointed toward a section of wall that had been bricked over years before. I always noticed that sign and always told myself maintenance just hadn't fixed it yet. Campus places are full of almost correct things. When I got close enough to see my windshield, there was a sticky note under the wiper. Yellow, cheap, one of those office pads. It said, in careful block letters, "I have your spare key." I actually looked around for a second, expecting somebody from studio to jump out laughing. That was the first explanation that came to me, because one of my classmates had found out I kept the spare in a magnetic box under the rear frame, which I know was dumb. He'd teased me about it before, so I told myself it was him being weird, or one of his friends thinking they were clever, or maybe somebody found the spare after it fell off and was trying to return it in the creepiest possible way. I stood there too long with the note in my hand, reading it again like it would turn into a joke if I gave it time. The paper felt damp. There was a faint smell on it. Not perfume exactly, more like old pennies and stale cigarettes. I checked under the car. No magnetic box. That made my chest tighten, but not in a full panic way, more in the way where your brain starts doing extra work because it wants the world to settle back into shape. Okay, fine, somebody stole the spare. Maybe they were trying to freak me out. College prank. Gross but manageable. I unlocked the driver's door, got in, and turned the key. Nothing. Not even a tired crank. Just a click and the dashboard lights dying down like the car had taken a breath and decided against it. I said out loud, "Of course." I even laughed a little, because dead battery plus creepy note was still technically a thing that could happen without it meaning anything. My dome light had been weak all week. Maybe I'd left something on. Maybe the cold snapped the battery. I texted campus security for a jump. Message failed. I tried again, then called. It rang once and cut out. I could hear water dripping somewhere in the level, slow and regular, and with every drip the garage seemed to get larger around me. I got out to get better reception, and that's when I saw him. He was standing behind a pillar maybe 40 feet away, just enough of him visible that I could tell it was a man. Dark jacket, one hand down by his side, the other lifted a little. There was a keychain looped over 2 fingers, heavy enough that it hung in clusters. Dozens of remotes, maybe more. Black plastic fobs, silver key rings, tags catching the light. He wasn't doing anything with them. Just standing there, head angled toward me like he'd already been waiting. My whole body went tight for a second, then my brain rushed in to explain him. Student. Security. Some guy with too many keys because he worked facilities. Maybe I'd stared at him longer than normal and now he felt awkward too. People look strange in garages. Orange light does that. I raised my hand a little and said, "Hey, my battery died. Did you call security by any chance?" He didn't answer. He clicked one of the remotes. My car's lights flashed. I felt it in my stomach before I thought it through. He clicked again. Flash. Again. Flash. The sound the locks made was soft but sharp in the empty level. I stepped backward without meaning to, shoes squeaking on damp concrete. He still hadn't moved, not in any obvious way, but when I looked from the car to him and back, he seemed closer by a few feet. Not enough that I could swear it. Just enough that the distance felt wrong. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. If he'd found the spare, maybe he programmed a universal remote somehow. Maybe these garages messed with signal. Maybe the orange lights were making the depth weird. My heart was beating too hard for those explanations, and I knew it, but I kept assembling them anyway because the alternative was standing alone on level 6 with a silent man who could talk to my car better than I could. I locked myself inside, even though he already had access to the locks, and tried security again. Call failed. Then, weirdly, I got one text through. Said, "Dispatched. Stay with your vehicle." That calmed me for maybe 30 seconds. He vanished behind the pillar. That should have been relief. Instead, it made the whole level feel thin, like the space behind every column had suddenly become important. I kept watching the aisle in the side mirror, waiting for him to reappear. My breathing got shallow enough that I started yawning just to force air in deeper. Then I noticed something on the passenger seat. A photo. It hadn't been there before. I know that because my passenger seat had a stack of tracing paper and an empty energy drink can on it, and now the can was on the floor and the photo sat on top like someone had placed it carefully. It was me at maybe 9 years old in a plastic raincoat, standing in my grandmother's yard with my old dog Junie. Same photo that had gone missing from a box after we moved houses when I was in high school. My fingertips went cold. I looked in the back seat and saw more things. Junie's collar with the brass tag. A beaded bracelet I lost at summer camp. The cheap silver ring my mother gave me before college that slipped off somewhere sophomore year. None of it was piled. It was arranged, seat by seat, like an exhibit. I don't know how long I sat there staring before I realized the man was beside the rear of the car now, just outside the halo of the brake lights. He clicked another remote and the trunk popped open with a soft thump. I made the stupid little sound in my throat. Not a scream. More like when you almost miss a step. I yanked the interior release to shut it from the front seat, but it stayed open. He finally spoke then, quiet enough that I had to crack the window to hear him. "I don't want your car," he said. His voice was mild, almost bored. "I want what you're hiding in the trunk." I said, "What are you talking about?" And even to me it sounded thin. He tilted his head a little. "You know." I didn't know. That's the thing. I didn't know anything except that every explanation I'd built kept collapsing before I finished it. But campus security had texted. They were supposedly on the way. If I stayed in the locked car, maybe I could wait him out. That thought held for maybe a minute, maybe less, until I saw the level gate at the far end start to lower on its own. The metal grill came down with a shuddering rattle until it hit the concrete. Then the one by the stairwell dropped too. Then the pedestrian door lock clicked loud enough for me to hear from inside the car. I started hitting the horn. It blared once, then cut to a sad stutter, battery too weak. The man stood there listening like it was weather. I tried starting the car again and got nothing. My hands were shaking so badly I had to use 2 fingers to hit my phone screen. No service now. None. Then a flashlight beam flashed across the far wall. For one wild second I thought security, finally. I leaned out the window and yelled. The beam disappeared. What came instead was a sound from the trunk. Not loud. A muffled kicking, then a breathy, panicked whine, human and close. I froze so hard my calves cramped. The man lifted the keychain and let all those remotes jingle once. "Open it," he said. I wish I could tell you I had a plan then. I didn't. I think some part of me just couldn't survive one more unknown thing in the same 10 minutes. I grabbed the little emergency flashlight from my console, stepped out, and moved toward the back of the car on legs that felt wrong under me, loose and unreliable. The air smelled metallic now, like I'd bitten my cheek. The trunk lid was open all the way. I could hear crying in tight, swallowed breaths. Inside, folded into the cargo space, was a person. Wrists bound with white cord. Ankles too. Gray tape at the mouth, half peeled off on one side. They were wearing my charcoal campus hoodie, the one with paint on the cuff and black leggings. Their hair was my color, cut my length. Their eyes were wide and raw with crying. For 1 second my brain treated it like a mirror, like I was looking at myself from above. Then the small differences hit. A freckle mine didn't have. A split in the lower lip. The shape of the left eyebrow slightly off. But it was close. Close enough that every part of me recoiled. She made this desperate sound into the tape and twisted toward me like she knew me. I heard the man behind me say very calmly, "There. Now choose." I spun so fast I almost fell. He was maybe 8 feet away. Up close he looked ordinary in the worst possible way. Middle-aged maybe. Clean coat. Dry hands. The kind of face you'd forget right after seeing it. His thumb rested on one remote, then another, like he was deciding which door in the world to open next. I didn't think. I reached into the trunk, grabbed the tire iron from beside the spare, and held it up with both hands. Felt slick because my palms were soaked. He smiled a little, not kindly, more like I'd finally done the expected thing. "Unlock the gates," I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. He didn't move. I swung at the concrete beside his knee as hard as I could. The iron hit with a bright, painful clang that jolted up both arms. He flinched back. I swung again, this time clipping his forearm. He dropped 3 remotes. I don't know if I was brave. I think I was past embarrassment, past fear even. Just down to one ugly practical thought, that if I didn't keep moving I was going to become part of whatever arrangement he had already made. I yelled at him again, louder, and something in my voice must have changed because he bent, picked up a remote with his other hand, and clicked. One gate rattled upward. I kept the tire iron between us and backed toward the aisle. He watched me the whole time, face blank again, like he was waiting for the next instruction from somewhere else. I wanted to free the woman in the trunk. I know how awful it sounds that I didn't, but the second I looked back at her and saw my own hoodie, my own face shape under bad light, something inside me just seized. I thought if I touched her I would find my own skin there. I hate that thought. I hate myself for it. I ran. The stair gate was halfway up. I ducked under it, scraped my back, nearly lost a shoe, and took the stairs 2 at a time until I hit ground level and then the campus walk, wet leaves and cold air and actual students 50 yards away laughing about something that had nothing to do with me. I made it to the campus police station on the edge of Main Quad with one hand still clutching the tire iron so hard they had to pry it loose. They went back with me. 3 officers, bright flashlights, a supervisor from security. The level was open. No man. No dead battery. My car started on the first turn. The trunk was empty except for the spare and the tire iron mount. No photos. No collar. No bracelet. The yellow note was gone. One officer asked if I was under unusual stress. Another asked if I'd taken anything to stay awake for studio. They were careful, professional, and completely wrong. I withdrew from the next week of classes anyway because I couldn't stand the idea of walking back into a garage and being the only person who knew what it had looked like a few minutes earlier. I transferred my permit after that and paid money I really didn't have for a closer lot in open air. I started sleeping with my room lamp on. I taped over the peephole in my dorm door because I couldn't stand the thought of looking through it and seeing someone already looking back. Every now and then I'd find some little missing object from years before in a place it didn't belong. A hair tie in my desk drawer, an old library card under my pillow, and I never knew if that meant it had always been there or if I had stopped noticing the line between losing things and being handled. The question that stayed wasn't whether the man was real. He was. Somebody had to be. It was the person in the trunk. If she'd been some stranger with similar features, that would still be awful, still impossible to explain. But it wasn't just resemblance. It was specificity. My hoodie. My ring in the back seat. My dog's collar. It all pointed one way, toward someone who had been collecting me for a long time, or making a version of me piece by piece, or finding another person who could be bent into my outline. I still keep my trunk empty now, years later, because sometimes at stoplights I get this brief, sick certainty that if I looked in the rear view at the right angle, I'd see somebody behind me wearing one of my old sweatshirts, waiting for me to remember her name. I finished school. Took longer. I told people the delay was money and burnout, which was true enough to pass. I don't tell them I still choose seats where I can see exits, or that I keep my keys in my fist when I cross a parking lot even in daylight. The whole thing would have been easier if the police had found one thing out of place. One dropped remote. One strip of tape. One old photograph on the concrete. Instead they gave me the kind of clean, reasonable report that makes you sound unreliable in your own memories. But I know what I opened that night. I know what looked back at me. And what gets under my skin now is the possibility that I wasn't the first person he assembled and not the last. Because if that garage really was his workspace, then somewhere there may be other cars, other trunks, and other people standing over them, trying to decide whether the face inside is theirs or just close enough to keep them from sleeping again. The next story is about a private parking space, the kind people pay extra for because it feels separate from everyone else. That's the lie at the center of it. Story 3. The private space. For about 3 weeks, every time I came home, there was something waiting in my parking spot that hadn't been there when I left. A single shoe, then a dining chair, then a rolled mattress. I kept making practical sense out of it because practical sense had gotten me through worse things than a few misplaced objects. Then one night I came down the ramp and found a dinner set for 2 in the middle of my space. Candles lit, plates steaming, and I understood that whoever had been arranging those little surprises wasn't trying to scare me away. They were trying to make me stay. My name is Adrian Vale. I was 42, recently divorced, and very determined to frame my new apartment as a choice instead of fallout. It was in a polished complex called Marlowe Court on the east side. All brushed steel, soft hallway lighting, fake plants that looked expensive, the works. The leasing agent sold me hardest on the private garage bay attached to the lower level. Not just reserved parking, a walled-in space with an automated door and extra storage, like a small room for the car. After the year I'd had, that sounded ideal. Quiet. Controlled. My own place to arrive and not be seen. This was early spring. Moving boxes still half unpacked upstairs. My name still new on the intercom. I liked the idea of secure routines. I had lived through enough mess to trust concrete and locks. The first time I heard the humming, I was unloading groceries. Soft, low, rhythmic, almost tuneless. It seemed to come from the wall behind my car, the one shared with the utility corridor. I stood there with a bag of oranges in one hand and listened. It had the texture of a human sound but not the shape of a song. More like somebody humming to keep themselves steady while they worked. Then it stopped. I pressed my ear to the painted block wall and heard nothing except the faint rush of ventilation. So I told myself it was that. Duct vibration, building pipes, some mechanical resonance turning into something my tired brain read as a person. I'd worked restaurant kitchens for 20 years before moving into project management, handled grease fires, robberies, bad neighborhoods, broken walk-ins at 3 in the morning. Strange noises in walls do not get to own me. That was the framework I kept using. I had survived chaos before. This was probably a building issue with rich person finishes over ordinary flaws. When I found a single men's shoe in my spot the next evening, brown leather, too narrow to be mine, I figured some moving crew had dropped it. When a dining chair appeared 2 days later, set neatly beside the bumper like someone had placed it there to rest a grocery bag, I blamed the neighbors. Somebody on the level must have been using my space temporarily, or the maintenance guys were careless, or the camera coverage had blind spots. All of those explanations were irritating. None of them were frightening, not yet. Still, each time the garage door rolled open, I caught myself waiting for the next thing. The undermining detail was always the placement. That's what I should have listened to. The objects weren't dumped. They were composed. The shoe at a slight angle facing my driver's door. The chair centered under the light so its shadow ran exactly to my front tire. The rolled mattress laid parallel to the wall with enough space to walk around all 4 sides. Like it was being shown to me. By then, I'd started emailing management. They apologized, promised to review footage, said no unauthorized access had been recorded. One of them even joked that maybe I had a secret admirer. I didn't laugh. Not because I thought admirer right away. Because the phrase implied attention, and attention was exactly what I didn't want from my home. Then I found the journal pages. I kept a notebook by my bed. Nothing dramatic. Just a place to empty out stray thoughts, so I didn't carry them into sleep. Grocery lists, apartment measurements, dumb reflections after the divorce. The sort of private language you use when you think no one else will ever read it. I came down one evening and found 6 pages taped to the garage wall beside the storage cabinet, copied by hand in neat block print. Not photocopied. Rewritten. My words, including the parts I'd crossed out in the original. There was the line about hating how quiet my apartment felt after 8. There was the sentence about still waking up and forgetting which side of the bed was mine now. There was even a misspelled restaurant vendor name I had corrected later in the notebook. Whoever did it had seen the originals. More than seen them. Studied them. I tore every page down so fast the tape took paint with it. My mouth had gone dry and I could feel sweat under my shirt despite the cold garage air. For the first time I let myself think ex-wife, not because she would do something like that, she wouldn't, but because divorce gives you a ready-made human explanation for things that feel personal. Maybe somebody helping with the move had pocketed pages as a cruel joke. Maybe a cleaner. Maybe a maintenance worker had been inside while I was at work. Those weren't good explanations. They were just better than no human explanation at all. I changed the locks upstairs. Bought a camera for the apartment door. Checked the windows. Checked the closets. Checked under the bed like a child even though I felt stupid doing it. And because I had been through hard years before and come out the other side by staying organized, I made lists. Dates, times, objects found, who from management I spoke to, what they said. My old logic was, if a problem can be documented, it can be solved. That idea lasted until the garage door started opening and closing on its own while I held the remote in my hand. The sound of that motor is what still gets me. Heavy, insulated, expensive, and somehow lonely. One night, I pulled in after work and waited for the door to shut behind me. It got halfway down, stopped, rose again. Then lowered. Rose. Lowered. I pressed my remote. Nothing changed. The light above the bay strobed across the concrete as the door moved, slicing the space into bright and dark and bright again. With each pass the walls looked wetter. Not soaked. Sweating. Thick clear drops beating down the painted blocks and gathering in the mortar lines. I touched one and it wasn't water exactly. More viscous, cold as metal. The garage smelled wrong too. Clean concrete underneath something expensive and intimate. A sharp cologne I didn't own. The kind of scent that lingers in elevator air after someone steps out. I called building management from the garage. Straight to voicemail. I called security. No answer. I tried to keep my voice steady leaving messages. But halfway through the second one I realized I'd started whispering. Then the humming came back from inside the wall behind the shelves. Same rhythm as the first night, closer now, low and patient. Not mechanical. Not pipes. A person making a sound because they knew I was listening. I slept in a hotel that night. The next morning management met me downstairs with a maintenance supervisor. They found no leak, no wiring fault, and no access panel in the wall I pointed to. The supervisor knocked all along the blocks and said, cheerful as anything, solid. He told me the copied journal pages were probably someone from the cleaning staff playing a prank, though nobody on staff admitted it. He told me the sweating walls were likely condensation. He told me the automatic door had passed inspection. Every explanation patched one hole while tearing another open. If it was staff, how had they gotten the journal from my bedroom without forcing entry? If it was condensation, why only inside my bay? If the wall was solid, why could I hear humming from behind it? For another week I kept coming home because I refused to be moved by something I could not yet define. That was the mistake my experience made for me. Surviving before teaches you endurance. It can also teach you to stay in situations long after a smarter person would have left. The objects kept changing. A wine glass with lipstick on the rim. My own spare scarf folded over the hood. A framed print from my living room, rehung on the garage wall at eye level. I changed the apartment locks again. I kept the journal in a zipped suitcase. I slept with the hallway light on. And all the while I still believed there was some structure to this I would eventually uncover. Neighbor, employee, ex-somebody with access and a warped sense of theater. Then I came home and my car wasn't there. I don't mean the space was empty. I mean there was a car in the bay where mine should have been, same make, same model, same slate blue color, same cracked little corner in the rear plate frame. At a glance it was mine. Then the details started slipping. My hanging air freshener wasn't on the mirror. The passenger seat sat a notch farther back than I keep it. There was dirt on the floor mats in a pattern I didn't recognize, half moons and grit. I stood there with the remote hanging from one finger and felt my breathing turn thin. The garage door closed behind me with that insulated groan and I knew, all at once, that I was sealed into a private room with an imitation. The smell hit when I opened the driver's door. Rot. Faint but unmistakable, buried under perfume and cold leather. The seats, the back floor, the trunk when I opened it, all filled with dead flowers. Hundreds of them. Roses, carnations, lilies gone brown at the edges, petals collapsing into damp heaps. They had been arranged around the interior like padding. On the dashboard, tucked under the wiper from the inside, was a folded note. You look lonely when you come home. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped it. I backed away and that's when I heard a tiny scrape from behind the wall shelves. Not humming this time. Weight shifting. Someone readjusting themselves in a cramped space. I looked at the block wall, really looked, and saw the seam for what it was. Not mortar lines. A panel cut so carefully it had been painted over and disguised. Barely visible unless the light hit sideways. Clear droplets ran down it in thin lines. Sweat from the warmer space behind. I didn't confront anyone. I wish I could claim that kind of courage. I ran upstairs, locked the apartment, called the police, called management, called the leasing office emergency line until somebody answered. The police came, then the building engineer, then a manager with a face already arranged into denial. They opened part of the wall after a lot of arguing and found a narrow service crawlspace running behind 3 garage bays, enough room for a thin person to move through on hands and knees. There were blankets back there, bottled water, a camping lantern, plastic tubs. Not much else. No person. My real car was later found in a visitor section 2 floors up. Keys in the cup holder. Untouched except for the same cologne smell clinging to the fabric. Management wanted it quiet. Liability, privacy, all of that. The landlord told me the crawlspace wasn't on any official plan. Then, a day later, he changed his story and said there was never any meaningful access route large enough for someone to live in, that maybe an unhoused person had gotten in temporarily. I was packing when I found the last note slid under my apartment door in the middle of the afternoon, while movers were carrying boxes down the hall. 3 words, same block print as the copy journal pages. I'm not leaving. I moved out that week. New building, different neighborhood, no attached parking, no private anything. Public lot, cameras, lots of people. I told myself that was enough. It wasn't. Privacy had already been ruined by then. That's the thing I didn't understand at first. The threat wasn't only that someone could hurt me. It was that someone had been with me in moments I had categorized as mine alone. Parking the car. Carrying groceries. Writing in bed. Coming home after a bad day and letting my shoulders drop before I put the key in the lock. They had seen those unguarded versions of me and then staged them back to me like keepsakes. I still hear the garage door in dreams. Not a crash. Not a scream. Just that heavy motor starting up and the light changing in strips across the floor. Sometimes in the dream I wake up inside the bay before the car arrives. And I know I have to stay quiet because someone is already in the wall waiting for the sound of my engine. The question I can't solve isn't whether he existed. He did. The crawlspace proved that much. It's whether leaving only changed the address. The landlord filled the wall, or said he did, and rented the unit again a month later. I found that out by accident online. New listing photos. Same polished floors. Same secure private garage mentioned in bold. I stared at the pictures too long, trying to see if the paint along the back wall looked fresh. Every lease turnover season, I think about whoever parks there now, the first time they hear a soft hum through the concrete and tell themselves it's only ventilation, and whether the note about not leaving was meant for the building or for me. I don't keep a journal anymore. I miss it sometimes. I miss the cheap privacy of writing something down and not imagining another set of eyes moving over the page after mine. People talk about starting over like it's mostly furniture and new routines. It isn't. It's about deciding what parts of yourself you can safely unpack. I got a different apartment, different commute, different grocery store. I even switched the cologne I'd worn for years because smelling it in a department store made the back of my neck go tight. But there are limits to what you can relocate. Home used to mean the place where nobody was studying me. Now it means the place where I have checked the walls and still don't fully believe them. The last story isn't about a private space. It's about a public one, crowded enough that you'd think nothing personal could take root there. That's what makes it worse. Story 4. The night shift. I didn't understand what I was looking at until I laid everything out on my kitchen table. The parking stubs, the little notes, the photo I took of the pillar, the registration printout from the DMV, all of it in one line under the overhead light like evidence from somebody else's life. If I had seen the pattern earlier, I might have stopped going to that mall. Or maybe I wouldn't have. That's the ugly part. The ending of this was in the first visit. I just kept giving it more chances to become ordinary. My name is Lyle Fenwick. I was 63 then. Newly retired from a claims office I had worked in so long that silence at home felt louder than traffic ever had. My wife had been gone 3 years. My son lived out of state. So I developed errands the way some people develop hobbies. Hardware store for 1 screw. Mall pharmacy for toothpaste. Department store for socks I did not need. The downtown mall garage suited me because if I came in through the south entrance and took the ramp all the way down, The lowest level was usually half empty. Less circling, less waiting, fewer people watching you back out. It was a sprawling concrete place under the retail block. Hot asphalt near the entrance even in cool weather. Gas fumes trapped low. Stale coffee smell around the pedestrian elevators where the night cleaners took breaks. Music from the mall leaked down through the vents, all warped and distant, like it was being remembered instead of played. This started in late summer. I know because I still had iced coffee in the cup holder and the garage had that baked smell old concrete gets after a week of heat. I parked on the lowest level as usual and noticed a black sedan one space over. Nothing special there except the driver. He was sitting behind the wheel with both hands resting low. Not on the steering wheel, just folded. Looking straight at me. Not glaring. Not smiling. Just looking in a way that made me decide not to make eye contact. I am not proud of that, but it is true. I have never liked the social friction of acknowledging strangers in enclosed places. It feels like an invitation to whatever comes next. So I got my shopping bag, locked my car, and walked to the elevator pretending I had not noticed. On the drive home, about 20 minutes later, I saw the same black sedan in my mirror. 3 car lengths back, exact and steady, through 2 lights, around a long bend, past the old post office. I told myself there were a dozen ordinary explanations. Same route out of downtown. Same neighborhood. Somebody heading toward the highway by my subdivision. The sort of explanation where if I overreacted and pulled some dramatic move, I would look foolish to a stranger who had done nothing but use the same road. That is more or less how I handled every wrong note afterward. I filtered it through embarrassment first. What if I am wrong? What if I make a scene over coincidence? By the time I turned into my driveway, the sedan rolled past without slowing. I stood there with my grocery bag cutting into my fingers and told myself, see, there you go. The next week I went back. Different day, earlier hour. Same level, though farther down because I wanted to avoid the exact spot and felt silly for wanting that. The black sedan was there again, parked beside a pillar with a faded arrow on it. Same driver, same posture, same steady look. I did not get close enough to study his face. I took my things and went upstairs. When I came back, there was something scratched into the concrete pillar next to his car. At first I thought random graffiti. Then I leaned in and saw my license plate number, every letter and number of it, etched with some sharp tool into the gray paint and the layer beneath. I should have gone straight to security then. Instead, I did what people like me do when we want reality to remain manageable. I took a picture, got into my car, and told myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe my plate had been copied down in a hit-and-run complaint. Maybe a board employee had entered the wrong number somewhere and written it while tracking spaces. Yes, I knew that made very little sense. That is what anxious denial looks like in older people. It wears a tie and uses complete sentences. It does not become less desperate. The third visit is when the notes started. Small square paper under my wiper, folded once. The first said, I'm almost ready for you. No signature. No flourish. The handwriting looked cramped, like somebody trying too hard to keep it neat. I looked around immediately, which I hated doing because it made me feel visible, but the level was empty except for the black sedan several rows over and the driver inside with his window down an inch. I considered walking over. I did not. I considered taking the note to mall security. I did not do that either, not then. Because what would I say? A person in a public garage left an odd message on my car. If they shrugged, if they asked whether I had enemies, whether it was a prank from someone I knew, I would have to stand there and explain my loneliness to a young guard with a radio. So I kept the note. That is why I call this evidence now. Because I kept everything. Maybe some part of me understood before the rest of me did that I would need proof. If not for the police, then for myself. The next note came a week later. The level is almost prepared. Same paper. Same handwriting. By then, I had started varying my routine on purpose. Different days, different times, once even parking on the second level where I hate parking because there are too many people. The black sedan still appeared. Sometimes next to me, sometimes across the aisle, once directly opposite so I could see the driver through both windshields if I looked straight ahead. I got better at not looking. That's another thing I am not proud of. Avoidance can feel like self-protection right up until you realize it has become cooperation. I did go to security after the second note. The young man at the desk was polite and distracted in exactly the way I had feared. He asked whether anyone had threatened me directly. I showed him the note and the photo of the pillar. He frowned, said they could check cameras if I had a time window, then took my number on a clipboard. No one called. I didn't push. Again, because pushing would mean insisting that this vague, embarrassing thing in a parking garage mattered enough to be taken seriously. I went home and slept badly. A few nights later, I woke around 3 in the morning and looked out my front window because I had convinced myself I heard an engine idling. There was nothing there. What lingered was the feeling of being a little late to my own life. The registration changed everything and clarified nothing. My niece works at a title office. I asked her vaguely how hard it is to check vehicle registration if you think someone may be bothering you. She shouldn't have helped me, but she did, probably because of the strain in my voice. I gave her the plate from the black sedan, which I had finally copied down on a receipt in the mall food court while pretending to read a coupon. She called me back that evening and asked whether I was sure about the number. I said yes. She went quiet long enough that I heard office chatter behind her. Then she said the sedan was registered to me. Not someone with my last name. Not a previous address. Me. Lyle Fenwick. My current address. My birth date. I laughed at first because the alternative was feeling my legs go hollow. Clerical error, I said. Identity theft. Typo. She said maybe, but there was also a purchase date from 6 months earlier and an insurer of record. I have never bought a black sedan. I have never insured one. I drove to the DMV branch the next day with my palms sweating against the wheel the whole way and spent an hour under fluorescent lights while a woman behind the counter confirmed, after much clicking, that yes, according to the system, I owned 2 vehicles. My silver wagon and the black sedan. She asked whether I wanted to update the records. I asked how a second car could be attached to me without my signature. She gave me a brochure about fraud and said it happens. That sounds like resolution. It wasn't. It was inversion. Everything I'd built as an explanation became less useful the closer I got to facts. If it was fraud, why park the car beside me repeatedly instead of disappearing with the paperwork? If it was harassment, how did it pass through state records with my exact information? If it was a coincidence, why the notes? Each answer stripped away a simpler one. I was not moving toward understanding. I was moving away from it. I stopped going to the mall for 2 weeks. Ordered groceries. Let prescriptions lapse. Sat in my house with the television on too low and listened for engines that were not there. Then one afternoon I ran out of cat litter and the little corner store near me had closed, so I told myself I would go to the mall once, in daylight, park on a higher level, get in and out. I believed that right up until I reached the entrance ramp and took the familiar turn downward anyway. Habit is its own kind of gravity. The lowest level smelled stronger than usual, hot rubber and burnt coffee, and the damp mineral stink of old concrete after a washdown. The arrows painted on the floor pointed toward the south aisle. I followed them, then glanced in the mirror and saw one arrow behind me pointing the other direction. I cannot prove that happened. I can only tell you what I saw. The black sedan was in my usual row. Driver inside. Waiting. I parked 10 spaces away and sat there with the engine running. My hands were cold on the wheel even though the cabin was warm. Part of me wanted to reverse out and leave. The other part had gotten tired of living around a person who might be sitting in a car registered under my name. So I got out and walked toward him. The garage music drifted down from above. Some cheerful thing slowed by distance until it sounded sad. Halfway there, my knees started to feel unreliable. I almost turned back. Then he lowered the window. Up close, the face inside was mine. Not exact in the way of a mirror. Older. More tired. The skin under the eyes heavier. The mouth set deeper. The white in the beard a little further along. But mine, unmistakably mine, as if somebody had taken my driver's license photo and aged it with attention instead of software. He looked at me the way a person looks at a clock that has finally reached the expected time. "You took a while," he said. His voice sounded scraped down, but it was my voice too. I had prepared questions in my head. None of them came out. What I said was, "What do you want?" He glanced toward the empty spaces of the level. Almost done. Then he smiled, and I knew with a clarity that made my stomach drop that this had never been about getting me to ask the right question. It had been about testing how much I would tolerate. First the shared road, then the repeated presence, then the etching, then the notes, then the paperwork. Each step a little worse, spaced just far enough apart that I could choose embarrassment over alarm and teach myself to stay. The level was what was being prepared. Not physically maybe, though God knows the arrows felt wrong under my shoes. Prepared in me, made familiar. I stepped backward. He did not follow. That was somehow worse. If he had lunged, if he had shouted, I could have become a man escaping danger. Instead, I remained a man deciding whether to admit danger at all. I got back into my wagon, locked the doors, and drove out without looking in the rearview until I reached daylight. I never returned to that mall. Not once. I endured it by shrinking my life. Delivery groceries. Daytime appointments only. No driving after dusk. Curtains closed early. My son thought retirement was making me eccentric. Maybe it was. The fraud report went nowhere. The DMV corrected nothing for months. Then one day the record showed only my wagon again, as if the other vehicle had been sold or erased. I did not call to ask which. I did not want a clerk saying the wrong calm thing into my ear and making it smaller. My world became a set of routes I had verified. Stores with open lots, errands scheduled around sunlight. People call that coping if they love you. When I spread the evidence on the kitchen table later, months later, I noticed something I had missed in the photo of the pillar. Above my license plate number, faint and older, there were more markings. Other numbers sanded down. Different lengths, different states maybe. Not readable enough to report, just enough to show a history. That is what I mean by inevitability. I was not the beginning of whatever sat in that black sedan. Maybe not even an important installment. Just a person who preferred the lowest, least crowded level because it made getting in and out easier, and because of that preference I slid neatly into a process already underway. I still wonder about the scope of it. Not whether the man in the car was me. He looked enough like me to make the distinction useless. What I wonder is how many levels there are in that garage or in others like it. How many drivers get paired with a familiar stranger and trained, one mild escalation at a time, to keep showing up. Sometimes, when I cannot sleep, I picture the lowest level after closing. Empty rows, muffled music bleeding down from dark stores, arrows on the floor pointing somewhere nobody questions until they are already moving. And somewhere in the middle of all that concrete, a black sedan parked neatly in its space, engine off, waiting for a driver who has convinced himself staying home means the route has ended, not realizing the route may have been laid under half the city long before any of us pulled in.